This is Dr. David Allen coming to you on the television program, People Helping People. If you remember in our discussion of our work with homicides and murder, I made the comment some months ago that as we work to reduce our homicides, we have to work to build our human Bahamian psyche, because the same force that leads to homicide is the same force in the psyche that leads to suicide. And so one of the challenges in our family program, which now reaches out to over 300 people a week, is trying to build that base that people recognize the danger of what it means to hurt somebody else, but also the danger of hurting yourself. Tonight we're going to discuss suicide, its causes, and what could be done about it. Ms. Keva Bethell is a distinguished researcher who works with the family and also national security, and she keeps fantastic data. To do this study, she had to go down to CDU and go in the files and work many days to compile the data, and she's just updating her data. But it's an international study, except it's one of the key studies in the Bahamas of our suicide problem. Ms. Bethell, what was it like for you to do this study?
Good evening, Bahamas. The study, it went pretty well. I'm grateful to the quality control section of the Central Detective Unit who gave me access to all their data. This was done back in March of 2013. And what I found was that in a 14-year period from 2000 to 2013, there was 96 suicides committed in the Bahamas. A lot of times we focus on the homicides because they seem to be more frequent, but that's 96 in a 14-year period. That's the rate. The rate was 2.1, and that's 2 out of every 100,000 Bahamians that commit suicide. That's in a small country, that's still too much.
And of course, this year, how many have we had? How many suicides?
I think we've had 4 already for the year.
4 for the year. And
yes.
Now that's it's just April, so that's an average of 1 a month.
Yep.
Keva, does this surprise you from your studies, that this may be a phenomenon we may be seeing more of?
Well, no, it doesn't surprise me, because what we found in the study was that out of the 96 victims, the rate among the males was more than 7 times that than the rate among the females. If you go to slide 2, you'll see that there were 83 males that committed suicide, and there were 13 females. And the rate was highest among 35 to 44-year-olds, if you go to slide 3.
So, Keva, the rate was higher among males than females.
Males, right.
Did you find any reasons why this should be so?
No.
Generally speaking, males tend to use more lethal or violent means.
Methods, yeah.
Females tend to use pills and what have you, less violent. But that's something for us to think about, because it is possible for the females to catch up with the males. And Keva, the type of suicide is mainly what? How do people usually do it?
The method used most frequently is hanging. If you go to slide 5, you'll see that more than 50% of the victims hung themselves, and that method was followed by gunshot wounds. We had 13% gunshot wounds used for suicide. Those methods are followed by fall, pills, sharp instruments, and other methods such as asphyxiation.
Mm-hmm. So hanging leads the way?
Hanging, yes. More than half the victims hung themselves.
Okay. But I guess with the plethora of guns in our country, do you think that eventually will become the accepted way of suicide?
It's hard to tell, because 55% is a little gap from 13%. You have 13% with a gunshot wound victim. But the hanging, if they're caught in time, that could be prevented, because I think there was one prevented this year. Mm-hmm. The young man went to hang himself, but with a gunshot wound, that's more immediate, and that's very lethal. So a lot of them choose the gunshot wound to the head, so that's.
Mm-hmm. What was it like, as a young Bahamian, highly qualified, doing this study and seeing the data and going through the reports? What was an existential feeling or reaction you had as you did this study?
It was It was surprising. How I got to do this study was while doing a master's in public health at the University of Oklahoma. I was looking at the comparison of homicide and suicide in the state of Oklahoma as compared to the Bahamas. And in Oklahoma, there was a high prevalence of suicide. So being a Bahamian, I wasn't used to hearing about that. So I was like, oh, I wonder if we have that issue at home as well, and we just don't really like pay it any attention, so to speak. And when I came home and I went to the Central Detective Unit to find the suicide cases, it was amazing to know that in a 14-year period there was 96. And not only that, we tend to think that this is just, it's just a Nassau problem, this, that, and no, there was suicide on 10 out of 17 of our islands. It's prevalent on all of the islands. If you go to slide 4, you'll see that 10 out of 17 of the islands had suicide, even the more remote islands like Inagua, San Salvador, Rum Key. So that was amazing to see, because a lot of people would think that's just something that we in Nassau would think of, and people on the islands are more protected, but that's not so when you actually look at the data.
Okay. The other thing, I think your study showed that the highest amount of suicides in the age range from 35 to 44.
Yes.
Any idea why that is, Keva?
I would speculate and think that age bracket from 35 to 44, let's stretch it a bit, 35 to 50, that's the age when people realize that there's a shame gap between their expectations and reality. Their expectations of what they should be at that age or what they should have achieved doesn't really match the reality. And a lot of times some people have a hard time coping with that shame gap.
So let's look at the shame gap. So you're saying between 35 and 44,
yes,
we have expectations for our life.
Yes, sir.
And at that point, between 35 and 44, you don't see those expectations being met. So then the gap between where you are and what you'd like to be gets bigger. And your theory is that shame gap leads to suicide.
Yes, because it's a process. It's not just an event. That's a process that one goes through. And we hear about the event, but the actual thinking behind it and the ideation, it all starts with a thought and with that feeling of hurt and shame.
So, Kevin, what you're saying, in our little country, we're very competitive, and we all have dreams of wanting to be this or that. And you're saying from your work, when we don't see those dreams crystallizing or those dreams shattered, somehow we feel our life is destroyed.
Yes, and then second to that also is the fact that a lot of us identify with what we have. We use that to identify who we are. So when we don't have those things any longer, like if you lose your job or you lose your home, if your whole identity is wrapped up in that, then you lose yourself in losing your job and your home. Do you follow?
Well, that's a very powerful point, because in our Judeo-Christian tradition, human being is a person made in the image of God, and God is sovereign and God is love. But what happens in our work in the family, we've found that when a person leaves that perspective, or is not educated in that perspective, then somehow their sense of value or identity becomes attached to their life situation.
Yes.
So instead of being I am who I am, beloved of God, I am now the money I have.
Right.
I am now the kind of job I have. I am now the position I have. I am now the politics I have. So then life becomes more precarious. And so when we don't have what we have, or own what we have, then somehow our whole identity is destroyed.
Right.
Do you find that a dangerous way of thinking?
Well, yes, that's why we would have the escalation in the suicide. But if we're being honest, if we're looking at the facts, this suicide study was done 2000 to 2013. Our rate was 2.1. There was a gentleman by the name of Spencer who carried out a study of suicide in the Bahamas. He published it in 1972, and he looked at suicide from 1959 to 69, and the rate was 2.8. So in 50 years, we haven't changed. So it's always been prevalent in our culture. It's just now we just now talking about it 50 years later. If in 72 we have a rate of 2.8, and in 2013 we have a rate of 2.1, that's still, we just now speaking about it 50 years later. So it's like, are we going to now stop and think, okay, let's try and get some solutions going so that in another 50 years people aren't still talking about a suicide rate of almost 3?
Well, I had an experience where a young lady came to the office and said, Dr. Allen, I'm worried because my boyfriend lost his job, and she noticed that he has created a hangman's noose over his bed in his bedroom.
Okay.
This interested me quite a bit, and I sought out the young man and was able to interview him. And he said, Dr. Allen, I just lost my job. It's nearly Christmas. And if you buy your girlfriend a gift from, say, John Bull, the kind of perfume, you know, you all beautiful
Okay.
ladies wear,
Okay.
if Carolina, Carolina Herrera, Joy, Tiffany, all the other names, you're going to be paying at least what? 70, 100, or if you buy, it could be even 200. And he said, I cannot provide that for my girlfriend. So if I can't provide that, she may not like me. And when she doesn't like me, she may leave me for somebody else. And so if the relationship doesn't work out and I can't provide for her, I just go to my hangman's noose and end my life. I said to him, well, what about your soul? And to my chagrin, he said, oh, Dr. Allen, I don't know. I don't have a soul. What soul? And it dawned upon me that maybe our theological education, Keva, is wanting, because he actually said he didn't know what a soul was. And as far as he was concerned, when you kill yourself, that's it. But not Christian tradition. The Bible says, don't fear him who could kill the body, but who after killing the body could destroy the body and soul.
I wouldn't say that our theological education is lacking, but if you look at the churches, that age bracket, that's the highest rate of suicide, at 35 to about 44, 50, that's the age bracket that's absent. So it's not that, oh, well, the churches aren't, doing its due diligence.
They don't go to church.
Right. So how can you get something if you don't go after it? How can you receive if you don't seek?
So why don't they go to church then?
I don't know. Do you see what I mean? So I think it's unfair to say, oh, the theological education is lacking. It probably is there, but if they're not present, then...
But did that surprise you when he said, Dr. Allen, I don't know what you're talking about, soul? What's soul?
Well, if you haven't been exposed to that education or that line of thinking or the truth, so to speak, then of course he's going to have that reaction. If he doesn't have that in him, or it was never a part of his upbringing, then.
But if his meaning was whether my utility outweighs my disutility, in that I have a job and can buy my girlfriend this particular gift, then I could live. And so when I lose my job, and my disutility goes up, my utility goes down, therefore I am not. Therefore, the next thing for me to do is to kill myself. Isn't that making life pretty vulnerable?
Yes.
And that proves the point you made about the shame gap.
Right.
That as we go, we have these high expectations, and when we see these expectations not being met, we feel our life doesn't count anymore.
Yeah.
We're going to take a break and be right back.